On April 10, 1917, an 18-year-old young woman named Grace Fryer entered for the first time the United States Radium Corporation factory in Orange, New Jersey. She could not imagine that this seemingly glamorous job would forever change not only her life, but also labor rights around the world. Grace was one of 70 young women hired that spring to paint watch dials and military instruments with a luminescent paint made from radium. It was a coveted job. It paid more than triple the average salary of a factory worker, placing these women in the top 5% of American workers of the time. The context was perfect for this innovation. The United States had just entered World War I, and there was a growing demand for military instruments that would glow in the dark. Marie Curie had discovered radium less than 20 years before, and this miraculous element promised to revolutionize technology. The April 1920 edition of Scientific American magazine listed products that contained radioluminescent paint: house numbers, lock finders, ship compasses, telegraph dials, mine signals, poison bottle indicators, theater seat numbers, luminous fishing lures, and glowing eyes for dolls and toy animals. The dial painters soon became known as ghost girls because the radium dust made their clothes, hair, and skin literally glow in the dark. It was a fascinating spectacle. Many of the women wore their best dresses to work so that the fabric would glow spectacularly when they went dancing at night, and some even painted their teeth with radium to have radiant smiles. Grace was the daughter of a politically engaged family. Her father worked as a union representative. She had 2 soldier brothers and wanted to contribute to the war effort. The job seemed to be a golden opportunity: clean, well-paid, and with social prestige. After all, radium was being promoted as an element beneficial to health. The work technique was specific. The workers mixed the paint themselves in small crucibles, then used camel hair brushes to apply the bright paint to the dials. To keep the brush tip very fine, they were instructed to point the brushes with their lips, a practice called lick-dip paint. The supervisors assured that the material was completely safe. Welcome to the mystery of the shining workers, an industrial tragedy that would become a landmark in the fight for workers' rights and would forever change our understanding of occupational safety. In the early 1920s, something strange began to happen to the workers who had painted dials with radium. Around 1921, the original painters from 1916 began to present symptoms: toothaches, mouth sores, gum and jaw pain, hip and foot pain. Teeth began to fall out. Grace Fryer had left the factory job in 1920 for a better job as a bank teller. Around 1922, her teeth began to fall out, and her jaw developed a painful abscess. The hazel eyes that charmed her friends now clouded with pain. She consulted a series of doctors, but none had seen a problem like that. X-rays of her mouth and back showed the development of serious bone deterioration. In 1923, the first dial painter died, and before her death, her jaw detached from her skull. In 1924, 50 women who had worked at the factory were sick, and a dozen had died. One girl lost all her teeth, and her jawbone became so deteriorated that the dentist simply pulled it from her mouth. Mouth sores made eating painful. One girl died when a mouth sore perforated the jugular vein, causing fatal hemorrhage. The most emblematic case was that of Molly Maggia, one of the sisters who worked at the factory. Although dentists did not know at the time, Molly had developed radium jaw. This occupational disease involved necrosis of the upper and lower jaw bones, gum bleeding, ulcers, and bone tumors. At the end of her life, Molly's dentists simply removed her jaw from her mouth to extract it. Molly died in 1922, just days before her 25th birthday. At the company's insistence, medical professionals attributed the workers' deaths to other causes. Syphilis, an infamous sexually transmitted infection at the time, was frequently cited in attempts to tarnish the women's reputation. It was a cruel strategy. Blame the victims. Dentists were perplexed by these symptoms. It was believed that the problem was phosphorus poisoning, but phosphorus levels were not elevated. One dentist believed it was an occupational condition, but was not sure which occupation caused it. A dentist, after examining one of the painter girls whose teeth were falling out, notified the New Jersey Division of Industrial Hygiene to investigate. The disturbing discovery was that all affected women shared a common characteristic. They had worked as radium dial painters using the lick-dip-paint technique that made them ingest small amounts of radium daily for months or years. The first theory that emerged was that of deliberate poisoning. Companies and medical professionals initially attributed the workers' deaths to syphilis, a deliberate attempt to tarnish the women's reputation. This conspiracy theory suggested that companies were consciously covering up the true causes of the deaths. The USRC had files of reprints of studies on radium that suggested the dangers of radium. The articles dated back to 1906. The USRC had distributed literature to the medical community describing the harmful effects of radium. Despite this knowledge, several similar deaths occurred until 1925. This strengthened the theory that there was a deliberate conspiracy to hide the dangers. A second category of theories suggested that the problem was internal to the factories, perhaps accidental contamination or inadequate procedures. Initially, there were claims that the above conditions were caused by X-rays that the women received to investigate their health problems, but the amount of radiation absorbed would be inconsequential compared to the amount they were exposed to daily in the radium dial factories. Some suggested that the problem could be solved with better ventilation or different painting techniques. On the second floor of the studio, the girls who worked there had no concerns. There were no lead aprons, no ivory-tipped forceps, no medical specialists. The amount of radium in the paint was considered so small that such measures were not considered necessary. Due to the mysterious glow and magical properties of radium, some popular theories attributed the effects to supernatural forces or mystical properties of the element. When Marie Curie and Pierre Curie discovered radium in 1898, many people concluded that if radiation could cure cancer, then it must be good for you in general. Radium was promoted as a cure for practically any imaginable disease or condition. This almost mystical belief in the healing power of radium explained why the workers did not question its safety, and even applied the paint to their teeth to smile in the dark. The correct scientific explanation began to emerge when specialist doctors began to investigate systematically. The disease was determined by pathologist Dr. H.S. Martland in 1924 as symptomatic of radium paint ingestion, after many workers from various radium paint companies reported similar dental and jaw pain. The first written reference to the disease was made by a dentist, Dr. Theodore Blum, in 1924, who described an unusual mandibular osteomyelitis in a dial painter, naming it radium jaw. Radium can cause fatal injuries because radium and calcium share similar chemistry, causing the body to involuntarily incorporate the radioactive metal into bone tissue in place of calcium. This is significant because while calcium strengthens bone structures, radium degrades the quality of bone structure. Alpha particles emitted by radium led to bone necrosis and bone cancer. Professor Robley Evans explained, "To clean and point the brush, the workers found that neither a cloth nor their fingers were very rough, but by cleaning the brush between the lips, the proper erasure point could be obtained." If estimates are correct, and the radium dial painters ingested a few hundred to a few thousand microcuries, their exposure was up to almost 20,000 times the maximum permitted radium in the body. The Center for Human Radiobiology was established at Argonne National Laboratory in 1968. The center's main objective was to provide medical examinations for dial painters still alive. The project also focused on collecting information, and in some cases, tissue samples from the radium dial painters. When the project ended in 1993, Detailed information from 2,403 cases had been collected. This modern research definitively confirmed that exposure to radium-228 is more harmful to health than exposure to radium-226. Radium-228 is more likely to cause bone cancer, validating scientific theories and establishing safety standards for future generations. The current scientific consensus, supported by decades of research, confirms that radium causes radiation poisoning due to its chemistry, similar to calcium, allowing the body to incorporate the radioactive element into bones in place of calcium. Radium concentrates in bones in high quantities and emits alpha particles as it decays, irradiating cells on the bone surface. Over time, radium settles in the bone where it causes havoc in the bone marrow and blood cell production. Modern scientific institutions, including MIT, Argonne National Laboratory, and universities specialized in health physics, endorse this explanation. Professor Robley Evans established a maximum permitted limit of radium in the body of 0.1 microcurie, a standard that still guides radiological safety today. Although the cause of deaths is clear, some questions remain. Radium has a half-life of 1,600 years and is still embedded in their bones. The ghost girls will continue to glow in their graves for quite some time yet. The complete long-term impact is still being studied, and new technologies may reveal additional aspects of radiation effects. There also remains the ethical question of how so many people in positions of authority, from factory supervisors to doctors and scientists, allowed this tragedy to continue even when evidence was accumulating. The legacy of the shining workers transcends their personal tragedy. The Radium Girls case was one of the first in which an employer was held accountable for the health of the company's employees. It led to life-saving regulations and, finally, to the establishment of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which now operates nationally in the United States to protect workers. Before OSHA was established, 14,000 people died at work each year. Today, it is just over 4,500. The women also left a legacy for science that was called invaluable. Their forced contribution to medical research established radiological safety standards that protect millions of workers today. Catherine Schaub and Grace died on February 18th and October 27th, respectively. The women would finally win lasting justice through those who picked up the torch of Grace and the other women in Ottawa, like Catherine Donahue. Catherine testified from her deathbed in 1938, ignoring her doctor's advice to give evidence. In doing so, and with the help of her lawyer, Leonard Grossman, who worked pro bono, she finally won justice not only for herself, but for workers everywhere. The Shining. Workers teach us that scientific progress must always be balanced with ethical responsibility. Their courage in fighting against powerful corporations, even while dying, established fundamental legal precedents that protect workers to this day. They transformed their tragedy into a force for lasting social change. How many labor injustices do we still need to witness before we act? The eternal glow of the Radium Girls reminds us that true luminosity comes not from exploitation, but from the courage to fight for dignity and justice at work.